Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. I'm not just a customer, I'm also a contributor. Our speakers today are Hawks customer and contributor Cassy Beckowski of Cabrini University and Hawks English Content Specialist Laura Brown. Cassy Beckowski is an Engagements with the Common Good faculty fellow and writing instructor at Cabrini University in Radnor, Pennsylvania, where she previously served as Writing Center and Peer Tutoring Coordinator. She has a particular interest in first-year student writing and served as a founding faculty member of a learning community designed to help first-year students develop college writing skills. Currently, she is exploring best practices for using technology to promote academic success and student engagement. Laura Brown has been working as an English content specialist for Hawks Learning for over 3 years. She specializes in developing and editing instruction and managing contributor-centered projects that build and enhance Hawks resources. Prior to working with Hawks, she was an English instructor who focused on instructing basic writing and analysis skills to incoming or recently returning students. We are excited that Cassy and Laura are here to share their knowledge and experience with us today. If you have any questions during the webinar, please enter those into the question and answer box and we will address them at the end of the talk. On that note, I will turn it over to our presenters.
Hi everyone, thanks again for joining us today. As Danny said, my name is Laura Brown and I'm an English content specialist here with Hawks. And so what that means is that I work on our humanities and social sciences team. And of course, that's sort of a broad title, and we are responsible for working with a number of disciplines, but English is sort of our baby. That's where we started about 5 years ago with English, and that is the area that our team has developed the most resources for that I'll share with you in just a moment. So the biggest focus of our team, our biggest goal is really to help to create, revise, and polish these resources so they're aligned with, the needs of our instructors and students that we work with. And, as Danny said, we're really excited to share today a little bit about the contributor-centered approach that we take to developing these resources. And so one of my main goals on our team is to work with instructors like yourself, really to help to train and coach them through developing content and assessments and, reviewing our materials to really get them to a place that we feel good about. And so we're excited to have Cassy here to share a bit about her experience as well. We've actually, up to this point, had about 90 English instructors help to contribute in some way, shape, or form to at least one, if not more, of our English titles. So I wanted to just briefly run through what it is that we'll be covering today in the webinar. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Hawks, I'll just share a brief history of the company and then really talk about our English titles and how they've been developed. And then share a little bit about what it looks like to be a contributor before we turn it over to Cassy to really talk about her experience, again, as a contributor and as a customer, and particularly to share that sort of insight from an educator's perspective. And then should you have any questions for Cassy or myself, we'll have time at the end to cover those. So Hawks as a company has actually been around for about 35 years. Like I said, we've been working on these English titles in front of you for about 5, but our founder, Dr. Hawks, is actually a math guy. So he was a professor at the College of Charleston and taught statistics and was looking for a way to, help and support students outside of the classroom. And so he founded Hawks years ago. We started here for instructors that there was a need to develop similar resources from the English side of things. They were hearing that from their colleagues. And so that's where the English team originated. So, we've really relied heavily on instructors over the years to help us to develop these resources. So you'll see a list of ways in front of you that we have used those 90 instructors. So when we really want to develop a new resource, so for example, English composition, we start with some broad research and some visioning. And so what that means is we get on the phone, we talk to instructors, and we get a sense of what sort of philosophies we want to apply to a resource, what sort of language, what our audience needs are. And then we work with them to help us build the table of content. So that really stemmed from instructors' ideas, both on content and organization. And then the heart of our resources, of course, are the instructional content and the assessments, all built by instructors. And then we do also run a number of projects for customers like Cassy, who also want to contribute because we do so heavily rely on that feedback. So throughout the year, we'll offer focus groups, surveys, customized projects as they come up. So you can see we really love to involve instructors from start to finish. And this title in front of you is the first way that we were able to do that. So this is the first English resource we created. And Foundations of English really targets struggling students who are in some sort of a transitional studies program or developmental. And, we asked instructors to help us create an integrated approach to reading and writing, and leaned on them to help create some contextualized examples and scaffold writing from a sentence to a paragraph to ultimately an essay level. And one area contributors have really been phenomenal in is helping us to find our voice in these resources in a way that resonates with students. And so that conversational writing style is really something threaded throughout all these resources that instructors like Cassy have helped us to create. And then in terms of some supplemental materials, actually both of these in front of you are ideas that came from current customers that ended up contributing to these resources. So the guided notes on the left helps to walk students through the instructional content by taking some meaningful notes. And we had instructors help us to build some exercises and activities. And then we also had a school that was really requesting some more basic grammar instruction. And so we created a workbook with their help. English composition targets first-year writing. And so we worked with a lot of writing instructors to really help us to communicate writing in a way that is applicable to students in everyday professional and academic scenarios, no matter their background or their academic past. And so we worked with them to create examples and sample essays and keep that relevance in language. Our English composition with integrated review is another one that's really benefited recently from contributor insight. We were hearing more about the co-rec movement in some schools and states. And so we really asked instructors to help us consider what sort of content would be necessary to review prior to getting to a curriculum level components of courses. And that's where our English comp with integrated review came from. And that does come with a guided notebook as well. And then the last resource I'll briefly mention is our handbook. And, we heard from instructors often that, handbooks can be tricky, and we wanted their help in making it feel clean and easy to use and straightforward. So we came up with something with their help that I think has really worked well for students. So like I said, there's just been a number of benefits to working with instructors. Obviously, you all are content experts, but you also know the audience, who it is that we're really trying to communicate to and how we can best do that. And I certainly learned as an educator myself, the importance of the ever-changing initiatives in education and keeping up with them. And so instructors have really helped us to stay current with what works best. So I wanted to just briefly talk about, what it actually looks like to be a contributor with Hawks. Obviously, being an instructor, you have a lot on your plate. And so we try to offer, a flexible experience for you. So this is all done remotely, and of course is all just part-time. We tend to work in short-term contracts. So an average project might last anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks at the most. But you're sort of only locked in for that period of time. But it's really quite flexible. We have a lot of instructors who will like to work with us year-round as things are available. And then we have some that sort of come and go based upon their own schedules and, how busy the semester is. And then the vast majority of our projects are also compensated. And in terms of what it actually, looks like to work with Hawks when you're completing a project, we certainly offer a number of, training materials to make sure that you feel that you're supported as you're working. But, and so we would send you those ahead of time, but then we would also host an online training Usually that's one-on-one, and of course project-specific, where we can really answer all of your questions and go through the steps of helping us to create a particular type of content. And then we would develop some stipulations for the contract and make sure that we're both comfortable with those. And then you get started, and as you work, throughout that 1 or 2 or 3 weeks, you'll be connected to a Hawks project lead. So it might be myself, some of my colleagues, and we'll be there to offer some consistent feedback for you, especially in the beginning, because there might be sort of a learning curve. And we're happy to answer questions throughout your work. So we've really enjoyed working with contributors and getting to know people this way. And then we have opportunities that are ongoing fairly regularly. So I actually wanted to share real quickly before I then turn it over to Cassy that if you are interested, I would love to hear from you all. So you can reach out to this english@hawkslearning.com inbox. That goes directly to our English team. And right now we do have project availability for authoring questions with tutorial components and feedback for our English composition with integrated review. So certainly would love to hear from you all if you are interested in that. And with that, I will turn it over to Cassy.
Hi, everyone. I'm just switching my screen over here. 1 second. All right, here we go. Hopefully you can see me now. Hi, everyone. And let me just pull my slide up. All right, here we go. So I'm thrilled to be talking with you today. As Laura said, I've been a contributor for Hawks. I'm also a writing instructor. I've been at Cabrini in a couple of different capacities for almost 10 years now. I'll talk a little bit about that. And I'm just really happy to be talking with you today. So just to quickly give you an overview of my presentation, I'll be talking a bit about how I became a contributor, digging into a little bit of the work that I do with Hawks, and then finally sharing with you how I use Hawks in the classroom. So just to give you some background, like I said, I was at Cabrini. I've been at Cabrini University since 2009. When I started there, I was the writing center, I was a writing specialist in the writing center, and then I eventually became a writing center and peer tutoring coordinator. Throughout my time at Cabrini, I have taught writing, and I have been, currently I've been teaching as an ECG faculty fellow. So while I was in the writing center at Cabrini, Catherine Cleveland was my graduate assistant for a couple of years, and when Catherine graduated, as graduate assistants do, she went to work for Hawks when she relocated to South Carolina. And she's actually now the program manager, I believe, for humanities and social sciences at Hawks. But shortly after she started there, she had reached out to me and said, hey, we're looking for contributors for creating content for our company, for some new English resources that we're developing. Would you be interested? And I, at the time, was just transitioning out of my full-time job as writing center and peer tutoring coordinator, going to just teach part-time because I was about to have my second son. And so it was really perfect timing. And that was in 2014, and I've been contributing ever since. So to talk a little bit about my work with Hawks, when I started, I guess, at the beginning of 2015, I've gone on to do about at least 16 projects, maybe a few more than that. I've worked on lots of the different resources that Lara was talking about. So foundations of English, English composition. Recently I was doing some questions for English composition with integrated review, doing some answer keys for different guidebooks and things. And I've done different kinds of work. So developed learn content, providing that introductory information to a concept, in particular lessons, developing question sets, so identifying the concepts that should be tested. And I'm actually going to dig more into that later, just to kind of explain how that process works. I've designed some sample reading passages. At times, there were periods where we would write passages that would illustrate specific writing concepts. And then I've also written passage-based questions for certain lessons. I've actually done citation style updates. So like when MLA updated a couple of years ago, I went through and made sure that all of the changes were consistent with the new expectations for the style update. And I did that with APA as well. And then I've even created videos. So when you go into some of the Learn content, you'll see that there's a narrated PowerPoint that I really like, actually, because it provides an overview of the Learn content, but it also presents it in a different way that, you know, makes the content more accessible to students with different learning modalities, and also helps to ensure universal design for the lessons. And I've helped with some of those projects as well. So just to talk a little bit about my process of designing some of this and how I go through it. Apologize, I'm off by a slide. So the first thing that I do as part of a process, for example, writing a problem set, so writing a set of questions. The first thing I do is I'll have a meeting on, usually just over the phone with someone like Laura or Sarah or Catherine, to kind of talk about what are the program objectives. And that's really helpful because it helps me understand what exactly the objectives are from Hawk's perspective, you know, what they're trying to accomplish, what kinds of materials they're trying to create, what exists already. They're also really helpful about providing guides to this is, you know, what the expectations are and the styles that we'll be using and everything for the particular project. And then, you know, it helps me to make sure that I'm creating content that is going to meet the needs of faculty and students. And then once I've had that initial meeting, it's great because I can check in with the English staff as I need to kind of get feedback from them. But I also can really work at my own pace and sort of independently. So I really like that. There's a lot of flexibility in this contributing process that really has been kind of conducive to my life, chasing around small children and teaching and doing all of the other stuff that I do. So when I go into actually then write questions, I start off by reviewing the Learn content. So I'll read through the lesson as it exists on whichever courseware I'm working in, so Foundations of English or English Composition or whatever. I'll read through what's there, and as I read, I like to just have a Word document open, and I'll kind of draft a list of potential questions. And then what I'll do, especially if there's an existing question bank, which typically at this point there is, once I've come up with my own list of questions, I'll look at the existing question bank, I'll see what's been asked already or what maybe could be asked in a different way or what hasn't really been covered yet. And I'll start to determine which questions I'm going to do based on where I see the gaps and what exists already. So then I start to write the problem itself, write each question itself. And usually when I have a project, I'm doing maybe, I'll maybe do 5 questions for one lesson. And then sometimes if I have a bigger project, it'll be up to 20 questions, but it'll be 5 questions for each of 4 different lessons. So there's always some variety within what it is I'm looking at in terms of the kinds of content that I'm addressing. But what I have to do, and I say 5 questions, but these 5 questions are actually more like 20 plus questions because we write lots of different iterations of each one. I'll create using an existing template, I'll create sort of a base format for a question that's testing a particular concept, and then I'll write many variations on that particular, on that particular content, on that particular question. But I try to vary the themes and I try to vary the contents of the question. And really my goal is to create a range of iterations that will appeal to lots of different students. And I'll come back to this, but that's something that's really important to me is, am I getting at the content that's in this lesson and testing that appropriately, but am I doing it in a way that is going to resonate for and be accessible to the students who are going to be using this content. Once I've written all of my iterations, I do like to do that first because I find it to kind of be the most maybe time-consuming part of this actually. Then I go and I write tutoring components. So those are hints and explain errors. So explaining, if a student answers something wrong, why they got it wrong, and then solutions, if they got it right, why did they get it right? And those are something that, again, they've sort of evolved in their style over the time that I've been doing this work in a way that I find really helpful as an instructor as well as a contributor, because I more and more can really make sure that I'm giving the information like in those hints that are going to help students have the best possible chance of getting that question right. Or in the explain error, giving them the information that is really going to help them understand why they didn't get an answer correct, and then be able to figure it out on their own. And I tend to do that kind of as the final step in my process. And then I send it back to the English team, and they give me feedback as needed, and that's the process. So some things that I think about as I go through that process. I think about my students' mindset. I really try to put myself in my students' mindset, or just in the mindset of the students who will be using this content. So how will students best learn and engage with these concepts? I think about what are the questions that my own students ask about this concept. So I think about, like, in my classroom, if I'm talking about apostrophe usage, for example, and particular questions come up about it, or there are areas that confuse my students, then when I'm writing questions, or when I'm writing a hint or an explain error, I'll try to approach it in a way that maybe predicts or anticipates some of those questions that students might raise. And I think about what kinds of examples will best illustrate the concept, and again, what kinds of questions are going to most interest students. So I've written passages about Komodo dragons and Coney Island, and I'll try to, whenever I can, make the sentences in an example. I'll try to make them kind of fun, just so that students feel, that they're not just looking at something. I don't want them to be just completely bored the entire time. So I'm trying to think of what can I do to make this fun, to make learning about writing fun, which is my goal as a teacher too. So to shift over and talk a little bit about using Hawks in the classroom, and just how I've been able to do that. So a couple of years ago, Cabrini shifted. We do have we're a private 4-year institution. We do have a developmental writing class. Not all students are required to take it, but that's a class that I've been teaching. They're placed based on their SAT scores into that class. And so that's a class that I've been teaching for a long time now, my entire time at Cabrini, actually. And a couple of years ago, we expanded that curriculum to a 4th credit. It had been a 3-credit course. And when we added that 4th credit, I was delighted, because that was finally some space to do some more of the grammar-based, sentence-level-based work that I always really felt my students needed, and that I had kind of struggled to fit into the curriculum in a way that I thought was really meaningful. And so I decided to use Foundations of English as a way to serve that need. So it's really been helpful for me in kind of filling a gap in practicing those basic concepts. I let my students use it pretty independently, but occasionally I'll kind of use it in class. They use it as the basis for a mini lesson activity that they have to do. We do a post-testing class that tests on those concepts. So it's integrated in different ways. And from my perspective as an instructor and as a contributor, especially as the courseware is developed, I can really see, like I was saying before, I can really see how this content, how these resources have continued to evolve over my time as a contributor and as an instructor using this courseware, especially like in the thoroughness of hints and explain errors. Recently, we've started doing explain errors that are like really specific to different kinds of answers to questions, which I really like, because I feel like the more precise that information can be, the more students are going to really internalize the concepts that are being tested. I also know how much work goes into really creating a diverse assortment of questions. And as an instructor, I really like that I can be selective about which questions I want my students to answer, and how many questions they have to answer. I can go in my courseware, like where I kind of manage everything. I can click through everything that exists. I can add things and take things out. And it's pretty easy to do, and it's completely customizable. And sometimes students will come to me and say, like, hey, there's a question in here that's really confusing to me, or this is something that I feel like this is so many questions, I'm never going to get this done. And then I'll look at it, and at times I've made changes to my curriculum and what I'm asking students to do based on feedback that I've gotten from them. And it's really easy to do. And then also, I really, as an instructor, love the customer service for this courseware, because there have been times that I've needed information, or I've run into a roadblock with something, couldn't figure out how to do something, and within minutes, they have figured out, they've been able to give me any information that I needed. It's very easy to use. They're really helpful, which has been very helpful to me because I'm not the most tech-savvy person in the world. Oh, apologies. And then before I switch it over to questions, just to quickly say about my student responses. Generally, they're really positive about it. I think they really like the practice, that they like that they can do it on their own. And more students are coming to me and sitting down with me to kind of work through this. But the thing that I'm noticing in that process is that I'm not having to like walk them through every single step of a question. I'm able to kind of give them a little give them a little hint or a little clarification, and then I can see the wheels turning and I can see them figuring it out and mastering the concept as they're working through these problems. And I think that that's really a testament to the way that this courseware has been designed, that it really is designed in a way that has the students' interests sort of at heart. And students like that they can kind of continue using the resource on their own too, as they see fit. Okay, so at this point, I think we can take some questions.
Okay, thank you both. I will remind our audience, if you have questions, to go ahead and put them into the question and answer box now. Laura, I think you wanted to jump in with, you had a question for Cassie.
Yeah, first off, thank you so much for sharing all that, Cassie. That was really helpful. I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit about, in general, the biggest benefit in your perspective to being both a contributor and a customer at the same time.
Yeah, I think that the biggest benefit for me has been being able to kind of look at the whole scope of like how students can learn from this material, right? So being able to kind of think of it from the perspective of what have I seen, again, like what have I seen in my own classroom as an instructor before I was using this courseware, and how have I been able to draw upon those observations, and how have I been able to like integrate them into the courseware that I've contributed, but then all the questions and everything, but then also in going through that process, right, as a contributor, that's a little bit of a different way of thinking through examples and stuff than I would in my own classroom. But it's, I think, informed how I do some of that work in my classroom at times. So, in a way I've gotten a little bit more, maybe a little bit more intentional in the way that I present examples in class, or in being flexible in the kinds of examples that I'll use in class. And I think some of that has come, it's just sort of naturally evolved from doing this work of like writing all of these different iterations, developing that flexibility has been really helpful.
Yeah, that's great. And have you seen students respond positively to those changes? I
have. And I think that in a way it's helping students to be more engaged. I think they're feeling more confident to kind of ask questions and talk about these concepts and sort of present what they know, what they feel like they understand, and then to be able to identify, this is what I'm not sure about yet, and ask for help that's really specific to wherever they're getting stuck. And I like that because I can see that, that's coming from the work that they're doing on their own, that they're attempting on their own, and then it's being reinforced. We can then take it and reinforce it and try it out in the classroom until they master it.
Sure.
And Laura, I'm going to jump in. We're starting to get questions here. Maria has a question that I think this will be an easy one for you. Does the contributor have to write incorporating a lot of code?
No is the short answer there. We've actually gotten that a number of times from instructors. No, we certainly have a whole team that helps us to develop the code and deploy the content. So we look to you all really as the content experts.
Okay, and we have another question from Tandalaya. I hope I'm pronouncing that as well as I can. She asked, can you speak to your time frame for development? Said, I know it's not an exact possibility, but what time commitment range do you plan for the development, and how has that time commitment changed with experience?
Yeah, so if I'm understanding your question correctly, you're asking, I think, about the development of an resource. So the heart of what we create are our online courseware programs. And so generally we spend about a year going through those phases of the research, the visioning, and then actually building an online course. And so that takes about a year, and we call that, we release that and we call that our beta version of the resource. And again, we use contributors really heavily throughout that process. And then we use that second year to enhance the content with contributor insight and help there. And then we release that as sort of our full release. So 2 years in full until we really feel that it's at a place that we feel really strongly about, but we do continue to build and assess and change, as Cassy said, with with some small projects along the way.
Okay, and we are right at 30 minutes. So that takes us just about out of time. I want to thank you all both again for all of the information, and thank you to everyone who attended today. If you do have any more questions, please email them to us at marketing@hawkslearning.com, and we'll compile them and get you answers back. We will be emailing out a link to this webinar to view it on demand, and you can view all of our past webinars at blog.hawkslearning.com. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thank you so much.